The desert battlefield trembled beneath the weight of distant explosions, each one sending a pulse through the elevated watchtower where Sergeant Kara Hale lay prone, her cheek pressed firmly against the rifle stock. Heat shimmered off the dunes in restless waves, distorting the advancing shapes of the Cauldron marauders who were pushing ever closer toward Erison Outpost. The alliance between humanity and the Commonwealth of allied species was fragile, new enough that every joint operation still felt like an audition. Today's battle would determine whether it survived its first true test. Behind Kara, a cluster of sleek-limbed alien officers observed her with expressions ranging from curiosity to impatience. Their leader, Lieutenant Vorik, shifted his weight with an exaggerated sigh. His green skin reflected the desert sun, giving him a faint iridescent sheen. "Is she meditating?" he asked, his sharp voice accented by a clicking undertone. Humans breathe, as if they are preparing for hibernation. Another officer, a pale blue analyst named Sevru, crossed his arms. Perhaps she has lost consciousness. The heat here could overwhelm a species so reliant on sweat for cooling. Their laughter rippled lightly through the air, more amused than malicious, yet still carrying the sting of condescension. Kara ignored them. She had learned long ago that explaining a sniper's breathing technique to impatient observers was as pointless as explaining gravity to a pebble. Slow breaths kept her pulse steady. Steady pulse kept her aim true. True aim kept people alive. That, to her, was uncomplicated math. Below, human infantry scrambled to reinforce barricades as marauder skimmers darted overhead, spraying bursts of plasma into the sand. The outpost sensor dishes were still rebooting from an earlier EMP strike, leaving the defenders partially blind. Kara's scope became the tower's borrowed sight, her duty no longer limited to killing, but to interpreting the chaos before the rest of the command could. She shifted slightly, allowing the wind to brush against her cheek. Even through the grit-laden air, she felt its rhythm, erratic, pulsing in the wake of burning transport wreckage scattered across the valley. She studied how each gust bent the smoke columns, how the heat distorted the outlines of distant figures. Nothing here was random. The desert breathed just as she did, with cycles she could read if she paid enough attention. Vorik clicked his tongue. She has not moved for 7.3 minutes. If she intends to fire, she should do it before the enemy arrives at our walls. Or perhaps humans simply require more time to think. Kara's voice emerged calm, low, and steady. Thinking's free. Rushing costs lives. She adjusted the scope dial by a fraction. Speaking of which, your marauder commander just set a beacon. What beacon? Vorik leaned forward abruptly, as if the horizon had suddenly become more interesting. Kara angled the rifle slightly. Through her scope, a tall marauder in segmented armor knelt near a half-buried ridge, activating a cylindrical device humming with violet light. If triggered completely, it would transmit an orbital targeting signal powerful enough to reduce the outpost to molten ruin. The sensor blackout meant no one else had eyes on it. "He's about to mark our coordinates," she murmured. The aliens grew silent. Their earlier amusement evaporated into sharp tension. Sevru's throat frill tightened. "You can see that from here. I can see what needs to be stopped." Kara inhaled, let the breath settle into her ribs, then exhaled halfway. Wind skimmed the tower railing in a brief, rare moment of predictability. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The tower vibrated from another explosion, but she held perfectly still, anchored by training, resolve, and the unshakable instinct that someone had to be the calm in this storm. The crosshairs steadied. Her breath eased into the final pause, and Kara Hale fired. The rifle cracked, a sharp punctuation in the roar of battle. The round tore through the wind like a thread drawn taut, slicing the heat-distorted air with impossible precision. Downrange, the marauder commander froze mid-motion, his violet beacon clattering from his claws before erupting in a harmless puff of sand. The energy field winked out, its deadly signal unfinished. For a moment, even the desert seemed to hold its breath. Then, as the realization spread, cheers rose from the human trenches below, short, ragged, disbelieving sounds of survival. Kara remained motionless, eyes still fixed through her scope, confirming the kill. Her heartbeat slowed, sinking again with the rhythm of the wind. Only then did she lift her head. Behind her, the aliens stood silent. The laughter from before had vanished, replaced by a stunned quiet that carried its own weight. Lieutenant Vorik approached cautiously, his pupils narrowing. "That distance exceeds our thermal accuracy thresholds," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "You calculated that manually?" Kara shifted her rifle's safety on. "I watched the smoke," she said simply. "Wind tells you everything if you listen long enough." She rose to a crouch, brushing dust from her sleeves. The patch of the U.S. Unified Defense Command gleamed faintly on her shoulder, the only color not muted by sand and steel. Severu tilted his head, his gills flexing in puzzlement. "Our targeting systems failed to identify that signal. Yet you, without instruments, could predict its path." "How?" "Because tech doesn't feel the weather," Kara replied. "Machines read data. Humans read the world." Her commanding officer, Major Lennox, arrived on the tower deck, boots scraping metal. "She's calculating wind," he said, catching the tail end of the exchange. His tone was both explanation and quiet pride. "That's what she was doing before the shot. Don't let her breathing fool you. It's math wrapped in instinct." He turned to Kara. "Good work, Sergeant. You just saved the outpost." Kara nodded, but kept her focus on the horizon. The marauders were regrouping, their lines reforming with eerie discipline. Victory, she knew, never lasted long in a desert war. "They're not done," she muttered. "That was their signal man, not their leader." Vorik's gaze tracked the shifting enemy. "You speak of them as if you know their rhythm." "I've watched them fight for months," Kara replied. "They're methodical until provoked. After that, they get reckless." She chabered a new round. I pressed once more to the scope. "We just provoked them." The ground shook again, this time with synchronized footsteps. Hundreds of marauder troops advancing in formation. The Alliance forces below scrambled to adjust their defense lines. Dust filled the air, thick enough to choke. Kara's visor display flickered as sensor interference intensified. Sever tapped rapidly on his wrist console. "All telemetry is compromised. We've lost drone visuals." "Then we fight blind," Lennox said grimly. "Sergeant, your eyes are our advantage. Guide us." Kara swallowed her fatigue, recentering her breathing. "Copy that." Adjusting for dust scatter. "Wind shift 2 degrees west." Her words became commands now, crisp and deliberate. Human and alien soldiers synchronized to her rhythm, relying on her to see what their instruments could not. Vorik crouched beside her, his earlier arrogance replaced by earnest curiosity. "You trust instinct where we trust calculation. Yet your instinct has proven more precise." Kara allowed herself a small smile. "Instinct is just experience in disguise." Plasma blasts streaked past the tower, lighting the air in violent arcs. A human gunner ducked beside her, shouting over the din. "They're flanking from the south ridge." "Already spotted," Kara said, pivoting her rifle. The next shot dropped a marauder sharpshooter before he could fire. Each pull of her trigger was measured, purposeful, an act of focus more than fury. The aliens watched in silence, studying the calm behind her violence. When the immediate assault broke, Vorik stood straighter, eyes gleaming with something like admiration. "Perhaps your kind is not as primitive as our archives suggest," he said quietly. "You read the wind like language." Kara reloaded, gaze steady. "Every battlefield speaks," she replied. "Most just don't bother listening." She turned her scope again toward the horizon, where new shadows were beginning to gather, larger, darker, organized. "And something out there," she added softly, "is learning to talk back." Kara steadied her breathing as the shadows on the horizon solidified into a new formation. Through the trembling waves of heat, she discerned the rigid silhouettes of marauder heavy infantry advancing with mechanical precision. Their armor glinted like scaled obsidian, catching flashes of firelight as they marched. The dust storm rising behind them only amplified their presence, casting them as dark phantoms moving in unison. Kara adjusted her scope, cataloging their spacing, speed, and likely firing arcs. Every detail mattered now. The outpost was battered, the defensive lines frayed, and if the enemy pushed through this wave, there would be nothing left to fall back to. Below her, human squads repositioned with hurried shouts, while the alien officers conferred in sharp, efficient bursts of language. Vorik approached her prone position once more, though this time without sarcasm. He knelt beside her, studying the formation without the dismissive curiosity he'd shown earlier. Their cadence is unusual, he observed, voice tense. They advanced too slowly for a standard assault. Kara nodded, keeping her eye fixed on her scope. Because they're not here to break our lines. They're clearing the field for something bigger. She shifted, tracking the heavy infantry until her reticle caught a brief flicker of red light pulsing behind them. There, that glow. They're shielding a walker unit. Vorik stiffened. A Titan-class platform? If it's what I think, she replied, then yes. She lowered her scope just long enough to meet his gaze. This is where things get interesting. Major Lennox's voice crackled through the tower comms. Sergeant Hale, we need coordinated targeting. Our cannons are struggling to track through the storm. I see it, Kara replied. But the wind's getting unpredictable. The fires from the down skimmers are messing with thermal updrafts. Vorik watched the bending smoke columns, struggling to decipher their meaning. You can navigate that. Trying, she murmured. But there's too much interference. Might need alternate data. Sever joined them, his pale frills fluttering. Our sensors can map micropressure shifts, though not with perfect clarity. He hesitated, a gesture Kara now recognized as humility. We can send you readings, if you can interpret them. Kara allowed herself the faintest grin. Let's find out. Severu forwarded the stream directly to her visor. Numbers flooded her peripheral view. Pressure dips, dust density, thermal pockets. It was chaotic, but chaos had always been her canvas. She filtered out the noise, letting the data accentuate what her senses already perceived. Her instincts filled the gaps, tracing a rough but functional map of the battlefield's shifting air currents. Then the ground quaked. The heavy infantry parted like curtains drawn aside, revealing a towering, four-legged titan striding forward with ponderous menace. Its particle lance swiveled, emitting a rising hum that vibrated through the tower's frame. Kara's pulse ticked upward, not with fear, but with cold calculation. Titans were nearly impervious from the front. Only a narrow, cooling vent on their dorsal spine could disrupt the power core within. A vent that opened briefly, rhythmically, like a mechanical blink. There, she whispered, tracking it. 9-second cycle. Vorik followed her aim. You intend to hit that? Through the storm? At this range? If I don't, that lance tears this tower apart, she answered. Sweat trickled down her temple, but her hands were steady. She exhaled, lining up the shot, reading wind that behaved more like a wounded animal than a predictable pattern. The vent slid open, exposing a split-second window. But a violent gust tore across the tower, ripping grit into her eyes and sending the reticle skidding off target. She jerked back, blinking rapidly. The shot was gone. Frustration surged up her chest, hot and unwelcome. She steadied herself against it, but her breath faltered for the first time. Damn it, she muttered. I can't get a clean read. Vorik placed a three-fingered hand gently on her shoulder. His voice lost all sharpness. Then do not read it alone. We will watch the storm with you. Sever nodded, already adjusting their data stream for faster relay. We learn together or we fall together. Kara swallowed her tension, refocusing on the swirling battlefield. Their faith steadied her as surely as any shooting posture. All right, she whispered, settling back into position. Let's try this again. And as the Titan continued its inexorable march, Kara prepared for the most difficult shot of her life. Kara inhaled, letting the desert's chaos settle into a pattern she could almost touch. The Titan's rhythmic vent cycle pulsed in her scope like the slow beat of a mechanical heart. Around her, The tower trembled under the distant concussion of plasma impacts. Yet the presence of Vorik and Severu beside her created an unexpected stillness. Their data streamed into her visor in clean bursts. Micropressure troughs, thermal ridges, wind shears too small for the eye, but suddenly clear when paired with intuition. She fused it all into a single picture, half instinct, half science, entirely necessity. Below, human soldiers held their lines with grit-born determination, and alien strike teams coordinated with crisp efficiency. Everyone was waiting for the same thing: the moment Kara Hale would attempt the impossible. The Titan's particle ants continued to power up, its glow swelling into a sphere of unstable energy. If it fired, the tower would vanish in a blast that left nothing behind but fused metal and scorched sand. Kara steadied her rifle, removed every unnecessary thought from her mind, and counted. 7, 8, 9. The vent opened, a narrow aperture glowing faintly as coolant vapor hissed into the storm. She exhaled, letting the air leave her lungs with deliberate slowness. This was the calm she had trained for, the heartbeat between chaos and consequence. The bullet left the barrel in a clean, decisive motion, cutting through the dust-choked air in an elegant arc. For a fraction of a second, the world felt weightless. Then the shot found its mark. The Titan shuddered as the round pierced the vent, ricocheting through its internal conduits until it struck the power core. Light bloomed inside the machine, not outward but inward, collapsing its structure before releasing a violent shockwave that sent debris spiraling across the battlefield. The outpost defenders watched in stunned relief as the massive walker crumpled to its knees and then toppled, its lance extinguishing with a dying whine. The marauders faltered. Their advance broke. Panic rippled through their lines, and they retreated with disordered haste, scattering back into the desert from which they had marched. For the first time since dawn, the battlefield grew quiet. Only the crackle of distant fires and the soft hiss of settling dust remained. Kara lowered her rifle, exhaustion finally seeping in her limbs. The tower's rail pressed cold against her cheek as she leaned back, breathing hard. Vorik stood, his posture tall and solemn. "Your precision surpasses anything recorded in our combat archives," he said. "You saw opportunity where our calculations saw none." Kara wiped grit from her forehead. "I didn't do it alone. Your readings gave me the picture I was missing." Severu's frills fluttered softly. "Then perhaps this union of instinct and analysis is the evolution our alliance needed." Major Lennox approached with a weary but satisfied smile. "Sergeant, you've done more today than hold a line. You prove humans bring something to this partnership that can't be replicated by machines or sensors." He surveyed the quiet battlefield. "You've given us a strategy worth building on." Kara nodded, though her gaze drifted once more toward the desert. The wind had calmed, its earlier violence reduced to a gentle, steady flow. She found herself listening to it with a familiarity that bordered on comfort. Vorik followed her gaze. "You taught us to hear the storm differently," he said. "For that, we are in your debt." She shrugged lightly, shoulders heavy with fatigue. "Storms speak. Most of the time, we're just too busy to listen." As the sun crested the horizon, painting the wreckage in muted gold, the last tendrils of smoke drifted upward like fading memories. Kara breathed deeply, slow, steady, purposeful, embracing the moment of quiet victory. The outpost still stood, battered but unbroken, and she knew battles would come again. But for now, the desert exhaled, and she exhaled with it, calm in the knowledge that humanity had once again found a way.